Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. This week I want to talk to you about how you can never get injured again. It might sound too good to be true, and that's because it is, but in the last video I talked about how I wasted essentially a decade in the gym getting hurt over and over again, and so I want to try and bestow some of my hard-gained wisdom on you guys so that you can avoid at least the majority of the injuries that you might have gone through otherwise. At the very least, we can reduce the severity of some of the injuries that you have by being a little bit smarter with your training. But unfortunately, a lot of people go through this. They get hurt over and over again. And for most people, from what I can tell, if they get hurt 2, 3, 4 times, they'll just stop. They stop going to the gym. Maybe they switch to something else like swimming or tennis or hiking or whatever. But for the most part, it's been my experience that people just stop going to the gym. They stay fat, they stay injured, and very often they become those people that say, yeah, in 2004 I slipped a disc, or in 1997 I hurt my knee and was never the same again. And they just lead unhealthy, inactive lives. And I want to tell you from firsthand experience that that's not necessary. Regardless of how many injuries you have or how severe they were, you can come back and probably be way better than you thought was possible. And if you haven't had a chance to watch my previous video, how I wasted a decade in the gym, I would recommend going back and watching that. I get more into my personal story and how I got injured and what the deal with all that was. But in this video, I want to talk about actual strategies that you can use to manage injuries and what I think is kind of the root of probably 99% of injuries that people suffer. The first thing you have to understand is that the title of this video is clickbait. You're always going to risk injury when you do anything, especially if you're pursuing a sport or some type of competitive venture. Any type of strength and conditioning at a relatively high level, you're going to get injured at some point. It's just a guarantee. So we're not looking to avoid injuries or make them disappear altogether, but we do want to reduce the frequency of them and reduce the severity of them when they do happen. And I can't emphasize this enough. I did not learn this in college. I did not read this in a book. I did learn a lot of this from other people who went over data and research and stuff like that. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I made this all up on my own, but I understand this to be true at a very deep level in a way that a lot of people don't, because I did it the wrong way for a very long time. And I hurt myself over and over and over again, and for a long time just didn't understand what I was doing wrong until thankfully, with a combination of kind of reading and also working with other coaches, I understood what would be the concept that would eventually save me. And that concept is tissue tolerance. Any injury that you have, any pain, any issue, or at the very least 99% of pain and injury, in my experience and in my opinion, comes from tissue tolerance, load and volume management. Now, what does that mean? So we'll keep it very simple. Think of a piece of muscle tissue. If you cut it out of your bicep and put it in a petri dish and just kind of said, okay, let's look at this piece of muscle tissue. That tissue has a certain level of tolerance. There's a certain amount of stress that it can handle. If you push that tissue beyond its ability to handle the stress, there will be some sort of compromise. That compromise can look like different things, and it can manifest itself in different ways. That's kind of a different video, but just keep that in your head for now. There's tissue. Tissue has a certain tolerance level for stress, and if you go too far past it or too far past it too often, then you run into issues. It can be pain. It can be kind of a nagging, weird sensitivity feeling. It can be a minor injury like a muscle strain that you kind of get over in maybe like a couple of days to a couple of weeks. It can be a major issue like a slipped or herniated disc or some type of torn muscle. So it can look and feel like a lot of different things, but the one thing I want you to keep in mind and remember is there's tissue and there's tissue tolerance. And the question becomes, what can my tissue tolerate? And how far can I push it before I get to that point where my tissue can no longer tolerate the training and the stress that I'm demanding of it? We're going to break training stress down into 4 simple categories. There are other factors at play, but for the sake of the video, we're just going to stick with these 4 for now. 1 is load, which is essentially weight on the bar. 2 is volume. How many reps and sets, or what amount of work am I doing? That can also count as how many miles am I running or something like that. 3 is range of motion. Okay, if I'm doing a bench press down all the way to my chest versus to where my arms are at only 90 degrees, that is a big difference, and that range of motion falls under the category of tissue tolerance and what range of motion can I tolerate. The fourth is rate of force or speed. So in my pseudo-professional experience, this is the cause of 90% of the issues with pain and injury management. I spent a lot of years doing mobility drills and activation drills, trying to get more mobile or flexible or activate a muscle group that I was told was lazy, trying to work on internal, external rotation of different joints. None of it worked. That's not to say that those things aren't important, because I think they are and they do play a role. But for me personally, this has been the beginning and the end. It's 90 to 99% of the problem. And that experience in my own training has only been confirmed as I've coached over the past, 5 to 10 years. And so I want to give you a couple of examples of what this looks like. For example, when somebody comes to me and they say, well, I hurt my back squatting, I say, okay, let's look at your squat training over the past 4 weeks. What do you usually do? What did you do in the session where you hurt yourself? Getting those types of details. And they say, well, I usually do maybe 2 sets of 5, 3 sets of 5, and then I go and do leg press. That's my usual squat workout. Okay, that's fine. Nothing seems odd. Technique looks okay. But my friend was in town on the day that I hurt myself, and I decided that I was going to do 4 sets of 10 on squats instead of my usual 2 to 3 sets of 5. And then on the last set, I hurt my back. Perfect. We found the problem, most likely. Usually, you do 2 to 3 sets of 5, which is 10 to 15 reps. And in this workout, you did 40 reps. You effectively doubled or more the volume, and so your back just wasn't ready to handle that amount of work, and so you hurt yourself. I'll give you another example. I had a guy come to me who weighed maybe 205 pounds, was pretty strong, in pretty good shape, but he said, my knees are killing me. And so we took a look at his training, and he had recently started to really push his running. He had always done cardio, but he would usually do like the elliptical or the Stairmaster or the rowing machine. He would go for a swim or a walk. He had never really run seriously before. And so over the course of about 3 weeks, he had taken his running from 0 miles a week to about 5 miles a week, which is a huge increase in a very short amount of time. And he said, I ran in high school, so I don't understand what the problem is. But that was like 10 years ago, and he hasn't run in 10 years, and he elevated his mileage from 0 to 5 in about 3 weeks, and that's a huge amount of running. That's a lot of stress. That's a lot of repeated impact that your knees and your feet have to deal with, especially for a bigger guy who's 200 pounds. The weight of his body landing every single time on the pavement is a stress that his body has to be ready to handle. And so I immediately looked at that and said, okay, well, there's your problem. So you can begin to see what I have seen on a pretty consistent basis, where when people have problems, there's something that you can look at in their training and say, oh, well, they were doing this, now they're doing that. And there was this big jump in the middle where we didn't really have time to build up to this new expectation that they have for themselves. Too much weight, too many reps, too many miles. Maybe a movement went too fast, or they just went through a farther range of motion that their body wasn't quite ready for. It's almost always the case that it's that. So all I do, as simple as this sounds, it's people really struggle to do this, but I just go in and I say, how can we put in more incremental steps between where you are now and where you want to be, instead of just trying to make this huge jump over the Grand Canyon? Let's bridge the gap and try and build something for you to walk across in between. Instead of going from 3 sets of 5 to 4 sets of 10, let's do 5 sets of 5, 6 sets of 5. Then maybe we take a deload week and you do 1 set of 10, 2 sets of 10. And just take a couple of weeks, a couple of months to build up your work capacity, because there's nothing wrong with doing sets of 10 on the squat. They're great. It's a lot of work. So you have to build yourself up to being able to do that amount of work. There's nothing wrong with running 5, 10, 20 miles in a week. People do it all the time while lifting. But you can't go from 0 miles to 5 in 3 weeks, especially if you haven't run in a decade and you weigh 200 pounds. It's just too much. You have to bridge the gap. And in that case, we said, let's start with 1 mile and then wait a couple of days, see how you feel. He ran 1 mile and we waited 2 or 3 days. He said, okay, my knees feel fine. We ran a mile again and he went a little bit faster. Then we waited 2 or 3 more days. He said, okay, my knees feel fine, no real pain there. And then we started to add to that. But we only added a quarter mile to each running session, which he did not like. He wanted to run multiple miles, but I said, listen, we have to find that amount of work that your body can tolerate. We have to bridge that gap between what your body can handle, its ability to tolerate stress, going back to that tissue tolerance we talked about, and how do we build up that tissue tolerance slowly. Sometimes you can build it up a little bit faster. Sometimes you got to go slower. In my experience, it's always better to take it slow. You're not going to be able to rush your body's ability to adapt most of the time. So even though it was very frustrating for this athlete to do this because he wanted to run more miles, he wanted to run faster, I said, trust me, let's just slow it down a little bit and give your body the time it needs and add that quarter mile to each running session. And lo and behold, about 3 to 4 months later, he was running 5 to 10 miles with zero knee pain. All he needed to do was back off, give his body that time to adapt, and allow the tissue to build up its tolerance to the stress that he was asking it to handle. So I hope that helps you guys. There's a lot of little details that can be difficult to manage, but that's the basic premise of what I want you guys to take home. So if you're dealing with pain or injury, something keeps tweaking and you're not sure what the problem is, take weight off the bar, do less reps, do less sets, and just slow down your rate of progression. Add 5 pounds a week, don't add 20 pounds a week. Add 5 reps to a workout, don't add 10 or 20 reps to a workout. Give your body that time to adapt and increase its tissue tolerance. And the more you ask of your body, the more time you have to give it to reach that new level that you're expecting of it. If you guys have questions and you're really struggling with this and not sure how to apply it to your training, please reach out to me on Instagram. I respond to my DMs pretty quickly. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like. If you have a specific question or something you'd like to see videos on in the future, don't be afraid to comment down below. I'll be happy to respond to you there, and I will see you in the next video.